The Divine Comedy is the greatest epic poem of the Middle Ages. It was written by Dante Alighieri, known to millions as Dante. Two things make it unique. It is the first major work to be written in Italian rather than Latin, and Dante places himself as the main character in the poem, drawing on his own experiences to take us on a journey through despair, revelation, and repentance towards ultimate salvation. Set during the Easter of 1300, the Divine Comedy was originally called the Commedia, the common name for a work that finished with a happy ending, as opposed to the tragedia or tragedies of Roman and Greek literature.
Talking about literary influences in Dante, it's very important to remember that before he started writing the Divine Comedy, the work for which we really most remember him, he was already a very active poet and working in a particular tradition of contemporary avant-garde culture.
He's a member of a group of poets in Florence called the Stilnovisti, the new stylists, and they had come up with this new poetic style. And Dante's, in fact, he's constantly quoting. He quotes sometimes from his poems, he quotes from other people's poems. So he's very profoundly influenced by what's going on in his literary world.
Dante at some stage must have engaged in a big program of reading, rereading and study, which involved many of the classics of Latin literature, especially the four main poets for Dante, Virgil, Statius, Lucan and Ovid. First and foremost, one's got to mention Virgil's Aeneid, the epic poem of the foundation of Rome, the central and pivotal influence to Dante in the writing of the Inferno. And the second key literary influence is the text of all texts, and that is, of course, the Bible.
Dante himself had a relatively limited education. He did not go to university, as many intellectuals of his day did, and as far as we know, didn't have a large private library. However, he was undoubtedly well read. He knew the Bible, which was probably the most influential work on him. He certainly knew some of the major theological texts of the time. However, a lot of his information would have come not from a primary reading of texts, but through works of compilation, which were very popular in the Middle Ages.
We can say that Dante had read and was influenced by Virgil, by Ovid, and in the vernacular by his closest friend Cavalcanti, but the influence is never one to which Dante passively responds. It's one where Dante is constantly changing, trying to outdo, to emulate, and to do better than the original text which he's discovered.
The images of Dante's paradise have encouraged many artistic works. In the 19th century, the French engraver Gustave Doré published his great series of illustrations, while the pre-Raphaelite movement was particularly inspired by the Divine Comedy. And translations of Dante's poetry by William Rossetti were accompanied by translations and paintings by his brother, Dante Rossetti.
Dante Gabriel Rossetti made an English translation of the Vita Nuova in 1848. Dante was really a central influence for Rossetti in a number of ways, both from this early work, but also, more importantly, in his own paintings, especially watercolours.
Dante was born in 1265 in the Italian city-state of Florence. His family had been established here for several generations, and, although not wealthy, his parents were able to provide him with a good education. He learnt classical literature from a master teacher, Brunetti Latini, and studied at the University of Bologna. He wrote his first sonnets at the age of 18, but he was also a man of action, serving as a cavalryman in defense of the city against the forces of the German emperor at the Battle of Campaldino. Dante supported the independence of Florence and opposed the corruption and interference of the Pope in worldly affairs. In 1301, he was sent as an ambassador to Rome to negotiate with the Pope, Boniface VIII. While he was away, a rival faction seized power in Florence and accused him of corruption. When he refused to meet their conditions, he was sentenced, in his absence, to be burnt alive at the stake. Dante never again returned to Florence. He spent the last 20 years of his life in exile in other Italian courts and cities. From this time comes his greatest work, the Divine Comedy, in which Dante presents a definitive picture of his medieval European world with its philosophy, morals, and beliefs.
Dante, had he not left us the comedy, would probably be known to us as a Cavalcanti is known to us, as Guinizelli is known to us, leaving us some very beautiful lyric poetry, not a lot of poetry, quite a slim corpus of work, not something as amazing and as intricate and as structured and as at least potentially influential as the comedy was, but to do something which purported to be as big and as important as that in the vernacular in Italian was really quite unheard of and quite untoward.
The Divine Comedy was circulated even within Dante's lifetime, even though Dante finished the final few cantos of the Paradiso just a few years before his death. The influence of the Divine Comedy on all levels of society, from the most erudite and learned intellectuals, proto-humanists, to poets in the vernacular, to blacksmiths and fullers and people working in agriculture. There are even contemporary records of them chanting out certain lines from the poem. So it had a very, very universal appeal, an appeal which fitted with both the popular and learned quality of the poem itself.
The Divine Comedy begins in the dark wood. Dante was in his early 40s when he began the poem and was himself at a low point in his life, experiencing the pain and despair of exile, failure, and loss. In the dark wood, he meets the Roman poet Virgil, who has been sent to guide him on his journey by Beatrice, the great love of Dante's life. Dante fell in love with Beatrice at their first meeting when he was 9 years old and she was 8. Marriage between them was impossible. At 12 years of age, he was betrothed by his parents to the daughter of influential friends, Gemma Donati, while Beatrice married a wealthy banker, Simone de' Bardi. Theirs was a romantic, courtly love. Beatrice inspired his early poems, and when she died at the age of 25, Dante was inconsolable.
Her name, as Dante highlights in one of the works that he wrote before the Divine Comedy, the Vita Nuova, the New Life, is the bearer of beatitude. It is through Beatrice that Dante finds his way to God. It is Beatrice who is, as the English critic and crime writer and translator of Dante, Dorothy Sayers, says, she is Dante's God-bearing image.
Beatrice is someone whose appearance in Dante's autobiographical or apparently autobiographical narratives is very continuous. By showing the relationship of these two named individuals and then writing a narrative which takes you not only from childhood through maturity to death, but beyond death and up to the heavens, I think he's making an important statement about how humans should conceive of their existence in a very long perspective.
After her death, Beatrice became an inspiration for Dante. In the Divine Comedy, she is the embodiment of his experience of love, who intervenes for his salvation and is the image through which Dante comes to understand the love of God. The Divine Comedy was written in 3 parts, each representing the 3 different kingdoms of the Catholic afterlife: the Inferno, or hell, Purgatorio, or purgatory, and finally Paradiso, or paradise. The book is divided into 100 cantos, made up of 3 volumes of 33 cantos, with an additional canto tagged onto the first book as an introduction. It's in the first canto that the 3 regions of Dante's hell are identified as the leopard or panther of self-indulgent sin, the lion of violent sin, and the she-wolf of malicious sin. Dante cannot escape from the dark wood as they block his path, so Virgil leads him another way, starting at Hell's Gate, where they read the inscription before they begin their journey. Through me you pass into the city of woe. Through me you pass into eternal pain. Through me among the people lost for aye. Justice, the founder of my fabric, moved. To rear me was the task of power divine, supremest wisdom and primeval love. Before me, things create were none, save things eternal, and eternal I endure. All hope abandon ye who enter here. As he leads Dante into the earth below Jerusalem, Dante assigns Virgil another of his deeper meanings, turning him into the symbol of human reason and poetry that can lead Dante and his like back to the righteous path.
It's very important to ask why Virgil should be chosen. After all, there were many other possibilities that Dante might have entertained. A Christian saint, Beatrice herself, a philosopher such as Aristotle. He seems to be chosen, as Dante indicates in the first canto of the poem, because he's a poet who lives before Christ and yet has an enormous power to illuminate the ethical life, the moral life, the political life, and this matters supremely to Dante. But a poet who is also a prophet.
Virgil is a pagan. He lived before Christ and he's not saved. And he lands up in the limbo in hell, where he's not actually punished, but he spends eternity without being able to see God. And round him cluster a whole set of questions which Dante brings up constantly. He will not let them lie. He's very honest in his attitude to the problems of Christianity and judgment, about, why is it that a just God will judge somebody who is good and honourable and rational like Virgil to be somehow rather incapable of salvation? What is it about this? Where does divine justice and mercy lie if this is the case?
After passing into upper hell, Virgil shepherds Dante past the futile to the first of hell's 4 rivers, the Acheron, where Charon, the classical ferryman of the dead, carries them across to Limbo, the first of hell's 9 inner circles. Here, Dante finds the souls of the unbaptized and non-believers who lived honorable lives. He finds them living in relative comfort, but excluded from paradise and the presence of God. It's from here that Beatrice has summoned Virgil to Dante's aid, and it is only beyond this circle that Minos, the judge of the underworld, waits to sentence souls to punishment in hell's 8 inner circles.
There are a whole variety of potential sources, antecedents, precedents for the structure and features of Dante's Inferno, Dante's Hell. The Bible, classical literature, especially Book 6 of Virgil's epic poem, the Aeneid, popular accounts of the afterlife, written in Latin and some in the vernacular languages too, and also medieval sermons as well. He fundamentally assimilates and completely transforms them. In all of the previous literature and descriptions and models for hell, there's neither the same variety and detail, and nor is there the same ability to capture that variety and detail in a fundamental underlying unity.
Many of the sins that he describes receive punishments that match punishments that were actually used in the legal system, for instance, of contemporary Florence. So I think he is, again, inviting us to assess very much the way that sin is not only damage of one's divinely given attributes and damage to the immortal soul, but it also brings very severe consequences for the polity, the social community, and the things that one chooses to do are not simply touching oneself, but also affect the well-being of many, many other people.
Beyond Limbo, Dante enters upper hell, where those who've succumbed to their passions and appetites are punished. Here, he begins his descent through the second circle of hell, where the souls of the lustful are Dante's first graphic image to be found shrieking and crying in agony. By warring winds, the stormy blast of hell with restless fury drives the spirits on, world round and dashed amain with sore annoy. When they arrive before the ruinous sweep, their shrieks are heard, their lamentations, moans and blasphemies against the good power in heaven. The third circle is for the gluttonous, where Virgil stops an attack from Cerberus, the three-headed dog, by filling his three mouths and his insatiable appetite with clods of earth. Dante borrows this foul and greedy creature from ancient mythology. The fourth circle reveals the spendthrifts, who push rocks around without releasing them for fear that some other would steal them. While the fifth circle contains the last of the self-indulgent sinners, the wrathful. These sulky and willful souls fester in a marsh, where Dante meets and questions the first of several of his countrymen. He himself had been unfairly banished from his home city of Florence at a time when Italy had been split into many different areas, ruled by either the Guelphs, who were in favor of the Pope, or the Ghibellines, who favored the Emperor.
Dante's determination to name names is perhaps one of the most striking characteristics of the poem. The way to communicate universally would be to choose types rather than individuals, but Dante is a Florentine. Dante believes that human beings live in cities. Dante cannot imagine being a human being without living with specific other human beings, some of whom have horrified him by their behavior, sending him into exile for one thing. Many of whom, however, have delighted him by their grace and their beauty, Beatrice, but many others too. And to name names is to specify, to open up the area of concrete historical reality, which matters more than anything else, I think, to Dante, more even than general and vague notions of another world.
The comedy is about life now, and it's about human dispositions, human reactions to what life throws at them. So talking about real people was an obvious thing to do, as far as Dante is concerned. And it makes it that much more relevant to the people who would have listened, because don't forget this wasn't printed, it wasn't published in the way that we know books to be published now. People who would have listened, who would have heard it, who would have known it as a story. There's everything from the tabloid tittle-tattle, adulterous marriages broken up, murders done by cuckolded husbands, to the great political issues of the day. So there's everybody from rulers to kitchen maids in it. That's why it's one of the greatest human comedies, as Balzac called it, ever written, really.
Beyond Upper Hell, Dante and Virgil are ferried across the Styx, or hateful river, to the city of Dis, or the Devil, that marks the boundary of Upper and Nether Hell. This is a place where the violent are punished. And thus the good instructor, "Now, my son, draws near the city, that of Dis is named, with its grave denizens, a mighty throng. I, thus, the minarets already, sir, their certes in the valley I descried, gleaming vermilion as if they from fire had issued." He replied, "Eternal fire that inward burns, shows them with ruddy flame illumed, as in this nether hell thou seest." Once within the city walls, they entered the sixth circle, Nether Hell, the hell that Dante has reserved for greater crimes. Here they discover the tombs of the heretics that burn with fierce flames.
You don't have to look very hard to start to find references right, left and centre to the Inferno, rock groups, Divine Comedy, films like Seven, for instance, where the Divine Comedy is mentioned. In fact, hell is mentioned specifically. Dante has mapped hell for us, but in films like Seven, that map's used by people who don't really know how to read the map. Dante, before any of the sort of zombie movies, invents zombies. Right at the bottom of hell you get traitors who are so horrendous to people that before they die their souls are in hell and their bodies are in possession of a demon. But very few people know that he has. They don't know the episodes, and they still less know what Dante might be doing with that structure, with that idea as a figure for, as an illustration of what it is to fail totally in being a human being. To fail in using your intellect, as Dante would call it, your rationality. And Dante is very, very clear that you are a free agent, a free moral agent, and it is your responsibility to choose and to do and to know.
The seventh circle of hell is divided into 3 rings, and once again Dante graphically describes the first of these. It is the punishment of the murderers who are found in Phlegethon, the river of blood. The faithful escort by our side, along the border of the crimson seething flood, whence from those steeped within loud shrieks arose. Some there I marked, as high as to their brow immersed, of whom the mighty Zentor thus. These are the souls of tyrants, who were given to blood and rapine. Here they wail aloud their merciless wrongs. Here Alexander dwells, and Dionysius fell. The second of the rings contains the suicides, while the third is reserved for a greater crime, those who have been violent against nature and God. Here, Dante describes an arid wilderness of desert and wandering souls that suffers under a perpetual rain of fire.
The way in which sins are ordered in the Inferno is explained very, very clearly by Virgil, Dante's guide, in Canto 11 of the Inferno. And the ordering of these sins rests largely upon an Aristotelian framework, so not actually a Christian framework. The principal distinction is between sins of incontinence and sins of malice or malitia. Sins of incontinence are to do with passions that were not able to be contained by the individual sinners. So lust, gluttony, avarice and prodigality, and anger. Sins of malice, by contrast, are sins that involve the intellect at some level. They involve some kind of perversion of human reason or human intellect, because their ultimate aim is to cause injury to others, injuria to others.
By choosing an unconventional and surprising layout of sin, in which, for instance, flattery is among the lowest sins, where lust is one of the first that you meet, I think he invites us to reflect very seriously on what the tools by which we live are, how it is that we order our relationships with other people, with the world, and how it is that we think about ourselves and control our own existences.
Dante calls the eighth circle of hell the Malbauge, or the circle of fraud simple, and he divides it up into 10 bauges. He and Virgil descend its steep slopes along a bridge that leads them as far as the 6th bauge. On the way, he encounters the panderers and seducers, the flatterers and simoniacs that stole from the church, the sorcerers and the berators, all of who have their penance to pay. The 7th bauge reveals the punishment of the thieves. Their punishment for taking possession of others' things is the loss of their own bodies. We learn of their fate in one of Dante's most gruesome and famous descriptions. But as I looked towards them, lo, a serpent with 6 feet springs forth on one, and fastens full upon him. His midmost grasped the belly, a forefoot seized on each arm, while deep in either cheek he fleshed his fangs. The hinder on the thighs were spread, twixt which the tail inserted curled upon the reins behind. Ivy near clasped a doddered oak, as round the other's limbs the hideous monster intertwined his own. Then, as they both had been of burning wax, each melted into the other, mingling hues. That which was either now was seen no more.
And what the thieves do is they deprive other people of their earthly goods. They are perhaps in themselves to be seen as ministers of ill fortune, but in depriving other people of material good and so on, they are seeking to circumvent fortune. Dante is interested when he starts to talk about fortune, fortuna, seen as lady luck, is your reaction to what life brings you, to your lot, and that really is the essence of the whole comedy. The thieves actually plan, they premeditate, they use their intellect, that's why they're further down in hell.
Beyond the thieves, Dante and Virgil continue their journey down through the 3 bauges containing counsellors of fraud, the sowers of discord, and the falsifiers. The falsifiers suffer for their sins in the valley of the diseased, for the disease they spread in society. Here they languish with hideous complaints. Now Dante and Virgil are lifted over a mighty wall guarded by giants and enter the part of nether hell where the sins of the wolf are punished. Here they leave behind the fiery images of hell that torment the souls of others and enter the startling, icy barrenness that surrounds the colossal devil that stands in the center. It is here that Dante finds the traitors, trapped and shivering in the ice in 4 distinct regions that surround the devil. Traitors to their kindred are found frozen with their heads above the ice, while further in, traitors to their country and their guests are found in similar guises. The traitors to their lords are to be found in the last of the 4 regions, and they are entirely submerged beneath the ice in a fearful symmetry to the ice within their souls.
The very bottom circle of Dante's hell, the 9th circle, the circle of the treacherous, is a circle that is formed from a river that has been completely frozen over, and the sinners of this circle, the treacherous, are punished by being immersed in this ice at various depths and in various positions. Dante meets Lucifer, the fallen angel, in the very center of the earth, trapped in the ice, up to his waist. He has 3 heads and 6 wings, 6 huge, gigantic bat-like wings. He's a hideous, grotesque parody of the Trinity, all of these 3s inverted. And his wings beat, and it's the wings that cause the icy wind which freezes the river Cocytus. So in a sense one has a parody of the Trinity in Lucifer, but also one has a sense too of the way in which Lucifer's wings in their beating create this kind of icy realm, this kind of antithesis, parody of true Christian charity, true Christian love, and that causes the suffering of the sinners there.
Having passed through the very center of the earth, Dante and Virgil begin to ascend towards purgatory, emerging in the early morning of Easter Sunday. This is the first time that either of them has seen the sun since Dante lost his way in the dark wood right at the beginning of the Inferno. The sunlight has, as always, an extra significance, and in purgatory we soon become aware of its symbolic importance. It represents God's light, and the law of the mountain proclaims they can only travel when it shines.
The Purgatorio is probably the most original part of the whole Commedia. It's entirely Dante's invention. The notion of purgatory in Dante's time was a recent invention of the church, and a rather dangerous one insofar as it quickly became a way of chiseling money out of the faithful, paying for as well as praying for their loved ones who passed into a realm which is within the jurisdiction of the church. Dante reinvents purgatory, refreshes purgatory, becomes central to the notion of human beings possessing freedom and being given the opportunity to use the freedom which they could have used on earth. It's the most humane, I suppose, of the 3 canticae, insofar as it's set within temporal circumstances, in an island in the southern hemisphere, not underground, as the church of Dante's time would have suggested.
At the base of the mountain, Cato, its guardian, curtly instructs Virgil to wash hell's grime from Dante's face and to furnish him with a humble girdle made from a reed before they can start their ascent. Like hell, Dante divides purgatory into different levels. As he climbs, he finds shades who embrace the love of God and are paying the necessary penance to remove the stain of sin. The first part of purgatory is the anti-purgatory, where the scramble between the mountain terraces and the entrance to heaven is both steep and difficult. It's here, the furthest from heaven, that Dante discovers those that have the greatest moral battle before they reach heaven. On the first of anti-purgatory's 2 terraces, the souls of last-minute repentance must now wait 30 years for each of their earthly ones before they can properly enter purgatory. Above this, on the 2nd terrace, souls await the equivalent of their own lifetime before they can progress. These souls belong to the indolent that postponed their confessions until just before their death, the unshriven that died by violence before confession, and the preoccupied who were too busy with worldly cares.
The Divine Comedy is one of the most optimistic works that has ever been written. It shows that A, God loves us, cares for us, and organizes things in a way in which to help us achieve salvation. And that's where the poem ends, with Dante approaching union with God. On the other hand, it is a work which is also full of grimness, full of horror. There's this constant interplay in the poem between the positive and the negative, the hopeful and the horrific.
Beyond the two terraces of anti-purgatory, Dante must pass the gatekeeper before he fully enters purgatory. My leader cheerily drew me. Ask, said he, with humble heart, that he unbar the bolt. Piously at his holy feet devolved, I cast me, praying him, for pity's sake, that he would open to me, but first fell thrice upon my bosom prostrate. 7 times the letter that denotes the inward stain, he on my forehead with the blunted point of his drawn sword inscribed. And look, he cried, when entered, that thou wash these scars away. Like almost all of the Divine Comedy, Dante allots a multitude of significant meanings to what at first appear to be simple descriptions. The gatekeeper's gold and silver keys signified Dante's absolution and God's willingness to let him pass. The 3 steps up to the gateway signify that the penitent must fulfill confession, contrition, and satisfaction. And the 7 P's on Dante's forehead indicate the 7 capital sins that had such importance in hell. On his ascent from each of Purgatory's 7 terraces, he has 1 removed.
Dante's comedy is this tripartite. There are 3 parts to it: Inferno, Purgatory, Paradise. 3 is the number of the Trinity: God, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And each part of this poem is divided into, let us call them chapters. They're in fact called canti, and there are 100 of those. So 100 divided over 3, well, you've got 34 canti in Inferno, 33 canti in the Purgatorio, 33 canti in the Paradiso. All this absolutely exact. He also uses 7, and he uses another number, 10. 10 is a number of perfection, Decalogue, you know, the 10 Commandments, 10 plagues of Egypt. So they come, these numbers, from the Bible and from biblical tradition, but they get rooted in medieval culture.
The souls in purgatory are guaranteed a place in heaven. Those on the first cornice or ledge are discovered carrying massive stones on their back. It is the stain of past sins, which Dante stresses they are paying penance for. Unlike the circles of hell, the cornices of purgatory each represent one of the 7 deadly sins, and the penances fit accordingly. The weight of each stone bows the head that once looked down on others. On the second cornice, the eyes of the envious are sealed shut, so they cannot see what they once desired, while the wrathful, who were once blinded by their own judgment, are now blinded by the black smoke encircling the 3rd cornice. Hell's dunnest gloom, or night unlustrous, dark, of every plains reft and palled in clouds, did never spread before the sight a veil in thickness like that fog, nor to the sense so palpable and gross. The 4th cornice heralds Dante's arrival in middle purgatory, and the slothful in life are here to be found racing round the circle, while above them the covetous pay the penance for disordered love. Here, Dante discovers the soul of Adrian V, the second of his popes, who, like the others on the cornice, is stricken face down, so the world he was once enamored with is now all he sees. The Divine Comedy has been interpreted by some readers as a text that is anti-religious, but this is not so. Dante's grievance is directed at the papacy alone. Like many people of his time, he believed that the Pope was corrupt. It was said that Pope Boniface had a tube installed into his predecessor's bedroom, through which he pretended he was the voice of the Holy Ghost to deceive him and speed his departure. More disturbingly, a story tells how he arranged a banquet for a nephew who was infatuated with a lady. Boniface deliberately arranged the seating so that the lady was sat in front of a doorway, and as the banquet got underway, she was pulled into another room and raped. The popes of this time were perceived as greedy, petty men, leading the church in the wrong direction and giving a bad example to the Christians that they were supposed to guide. This is how Dante portrays them in the comedy, where they're condemned from the beginning of hell to the summit of paradise.
The church in Dante's time was not only a religious institution, but one that had important political power and which was jostling to assert its capacity to act in the realm of day-to-day politics, and was embroiled in various controversies of a legal, political, military nature. Dante himself, like St. Francis, another important leader earlier in the century, felt that the church's political involvement was contaminating its purity, reducing it to the level of any political institution which one might wish to oppose and expose as fallible.
The sixth level of purgatory is where the emaciated bodies of the gluttonous are starved within sight of plenty. The final level of Dante's purgatory is made up by the lustful. These souls find themselves in the traditional fire, an image of lust and excess used to purify their souls. Leaving the lustful, Dante and Virgil encounter the angel of chastity, who tells them they can go no further without themselves passing through the flames. Dante hesitates, but Virgil persuades him. Passing through the flames, they climb until they reach the summit. Here, Virgil tells Dante he no longer needs his guidance. Dante now finds himself in the Garden of Eden, where he is reunited with Beatrice, and Virgil disappears. Entering paradise, Dante is greeted with two pageants that are to show the history of the church. The pageants are a carefully crafted exercise in allegorical meaning in which Beatrice takes a primary role. The details of the interpretation have been argued over by many literary scholars, and the numerous translations have led to different interpretations. The poet and artist William Blake provided annotations to Dante's work, and also produced a series of pictures, one of which illustrates the beauty of the pageant which mythical beast and redeemed souls enact. The composer Franz Liszt also wrote the Dante Symphony in dedication to the great man.
Dante's immediate impact was perhaps rather curious. His immediate successors, such as Boccaccio and Petrarch, read him, admired the enormous achievement, but were in a way, I think, overawed by it. And indeed, for several centuries, Petrarch was perhaps a great deal more influential than Dante himself, certainly throughout the Renaissance. And it's within the 19th and particularly the 20th century that Dante begins to be recovered as the most central man, in some sense, as Ruskin puts it, in the European culture.
Dante now begins his ascent into paradise, the last of the three kingdoms, in the company of Beatrice. It's she who explains to him that he has now left the world and worldly needs behind him. This symbol of transcending love explains that they are no longer ruled by the nature of earthly science, but a godly one. Thou art not on the earth as thou believest, for lightning scaped from its own proper place near ran as thou hast hither now returned. Dante's heaven mirrored the popularity of hell with Dante's readership. It is deliberately unlike the other kingdoms. Here, there are no punishments or penances to be distributed. It is a paradise where the love of God is emanated to all. As Dante ascends through the different rings of heaven, he always tells us of the increase in Beatrice's beauty, and that the closer he is to God, the greater the beauty becomes. Like purgatory and hell before it, Dante's paradise is built up out of a numeric design. 10 levels are ascended in turn, the first 7 of which are planetary heavens arranged in accord with the astrological beliefs of Dante's time.
Astronomy plays a very important role in Dante's conception of the afterlife, because Dante bases his vision of paradise upon one of the dominant astronomical models of the universe current at his time, the so-called Ptolemaic system, which has the Earth at its center, and then the different heavens, the Moon, Mercury, etc., circling around it, which is obviously very different from the view of the universe that we have nowadays.
At the beginning of the 14th century, keen astrologers like Dante still believed in the Greek astrological system that worked on the principle that the Earth was the center of the universe, and everything else revolved around it in a complex series of movements. In this universe, the order of the planets swapped the position of the Earth with the Sun and placed the Moon between the Earth and Mercury, the first of the real planets. It is along this route that Dante is taken, and at each of these 7 planets he meets and questions the manifestations of the spirits that have ascended into heaven. It's important to understand that these are only manifestations of the different spirits, and Dante is quick to stress this too. The first level that Dante reaches is that of inconstancy. Here, within the Moon, he meets those whose vows were unfulfilled, even though they led worthy lives. Above the Moon, he journeys on with Beatrice while still discussing the form of free will and the nature of monastic vows, until they reach the second of the planets, Mercury. Around Mercury, they find the ambitious, whose worldly wants got in the way of devotion. Here they meet Justinian, a Roman ruler, who, after extolling the divine destiny and achievements of Rome, criticizes the Guelph and Ghibelline factions of Florence. So that 'tis hard to see which more offends. Be yours, ye Ghibellines, to veil your arts beneath another standard. Ill is this followed of him who severs it and justice. And let not with his Guelphs the new-crowned Charles assail it, but those talons hold in dread which from a lion of more lofty port have rent the easing. Dante's continual attack on the powers that exiled him from Florence continues throughout Paradise. By setting his tale in 1300, even though he started writing the Divine Comedy in 1308, he allows characters to prophesy a future that has already passed, and in doing so avoids banishing himself to the circle of hell where the fortune-tellers walk around backwards. In the next realm of heaven, the realm of the planet Venus and ancient idolatry, he meets more souls who drop out of the universal dance and the universal song that encircles him. Once again, when he looks upon Beatrice, her beauty appears to have grown, and everything around him appears to do so as he gets ever closer to the center of the realms.
Going through the spheres of heaven is to go through Dante's idea of interplanetary space. And this is space travel, this is travel in space and time. What Dante does with heaven is he takes ideas that are perhaps first voiced in the Gospels. You know, my Father's house is a house of many mansions. One might say today it's a house of many rooms. Christ is talking about paradise. There's room for loads of different individuals and loads of different characters and lifestyles. Dante's heaven, dependent as it is upon his description of the spheres, upon his astronomy, also enables him to talk about individuals as they are, and yet to reconcile that with a oneness with God, a God who's outside space and time, which is actually where reality lies, where these souls are when they're not representing themselves to Dante.
The fourth realm is the realm of the sun. Having replaced the earth in the medieval order of astronomy, it now plays host to the first realm free from the earth's shadow, as is the realm of the prudent. Beyond this, there are the realms of Mars, where they discover fortitude, the realm of Jupiter and justice, and at Saturn, the last of the planetary realms is temperance, the realm of moderation. When he reaches the eighth realm, the realm of the stellar heaven, Dante once again speaks to manifested souls, and to show how far and how high he has come, he speaks to the apostles, and St. Peter glows red with anger as he continues Dante's attack on Pope Boniface. When thus I heard, "Wonder not if my hue be changed, for while I speak, these shalt see all in like manner change with me. My place he who usurps on earth my place, I, mine, which in the presence of the Son of God is void. The same hath made my cemetery a common sewer of puddle and of blood. The more below his triumph who from hence malignant fell. Dante is taken to the 9th realm, where the angels are manifested. Passing on with awe, he is shown the 10th realm called the Empyrean, and it's here that he at last sees all of the heavenly souls together. After seeing their manifestations in the series of different realms allotted to them, here Beatrice joins with them, and he sees the true light of their souls before he is overwhelmed by the light of God. Of sovereign light, thenceforward what I saw was not for words to speak, nor memory's self to stand against such outrage on her skill. As one who from a dream awakened straight, all he hath seen forgets, yet still retains impression of the feeling in his dream. E'en such am I, for all the vision dies, as 'twere away, and yet the sense of sweet that sprang from it still trickles in my heart. The final image that Dante gives us of paradise is one of unfathomable love. It is here that he makes his grandest distinction between the kingdoms of the dead and leaves the reader behind, telling us of his duty to record all of what we have read. The poetry of paradise is more subtle and less graphic than the Inferno, but no less respected. Dante's poetry has impressed and influenced other poets from Chaucer to Milton. The poetry of T.S. Eliot has been closely linked with Dante's comedy, and Eliot's poem, The Wasteland, borrows many of its characters directly from the Inferno.
Poets, T.S. Eliot, Samuel Beckett, and many, many others have seen in Dante clarity of thought, precision of image as being the dominant features. But it's not simply poets, visual artists, people such as Tom Phillips and Peter Greenaway in his version of the Inferno, the TV Dante, sculptors, Japanese sculptors that one can think of who've set themselves to depict it, following in the footsteps of the French sculptor Rodin, for example, whose Gates of Hell and The Thinker, the famous Thinker, are in fact depictions of the Inferno. I think one of the most natural reactions is not simply to think medieval, but to think dance, or to think visuals, or to think moving sculptures. And one's very confident that this will be the future that Dante has in contemporaries beyond our own contemporaries.
It took Dante almost 13 years to finish the Divine Comedy, and in the writing of it, he crafted a story that has been read and reread all over the world. No other work or poet can claim 6.5 centuries of inspiration or a continuing emulation in the pages of novel writers today.
It was immediately recognised that the Divine Comedy was a huge poetic achievement. It was controversial because it dabbled in the realm of theology and indeed of politics by its enormous cast of historical characters and its audacity in describing the afterlife, which might be conceived as being the exclusive realm of the church.
Dante brings together different literary traditions, and in doing so challenges the way in which people had written before him. Dante didn't write a large number of works, or at least not a large body of works has come down to us, and there isn't really any evidence to suggest that works have become lost. And there's a lot of agreement that it's very hard to find a word out of place in Dante.
His ability to capture the utmost variety in a unified, completely intricately conceived architecture, to use a vernacular Tuscan dialect, to develop it, to make it do new things, to make it analyse both the very depths of sin and the very upper reaches of beatitude. All of these kinds of achievements are fundamentally Dantean.
It's not fundamentally about the afterlife, it is about what you do with the choices that you're given, how you react with what life throws at you. And it's the pictures of the psychological mindsets, the positions that people allow themselves to get into, which make it both so fascinating and so frightening, because it is Dante's journey, but it's a journey that he undertakes as a pilgrim, and it's a journey that you as a reader undertake as a pilgrim.